Here's how to make aerated compost tea. I'm going to take you through the equipment, the recipes and ingredients, and finally the process to do it. Let's start with the equipment. First thing you'll need is a bucket. I've got a big 32-gallon, actually a clean garbage can here. You could also use a smaller bucket. This is a 3-gallon, 5-gallon, 1-gallon. It doesn't matter. You can scale this to however much compost tea you need. The more the better though, right? So once you've got your bucket cleaned out, and make sure if you've used it for anything else that you've bleached it and got any residual bacteria out of there, then you'll want to move on to an aeration device. So obviously the purpose of an aeration device is to provide oxygen or air into the liquid mixture to encourage the beneficial bacteria to bloom and to grow. So what I've got here is a pretty good sized active aqua aeration unit. This is used for hydroponics, large ponds, just commercial purposes, things like that. These are pretty affordable if you want to go buy one just for the purpose. But if you happen to have just a small aquarium style aerator, that would be fine as well, especially if you're using smaller batches. Next thing you'll need is some type of a aeration or an air stone. This is one of several that I'll be putting into this larger batch. Next thing you'll need is some type of a containment vessel for your compost. I'm going to try an experiment here today with this minnow bucket, which I had lying around. I think this will work fine. More common to use something like cheesecloth, which I'll also use today, and a pillowcase or a burlap bag, anything like that that can actually hold your compost mixture as it's brewing. We'll just keep things cleaner. Next thing is some string. You'll just need this to kind of keep things in place, to tie up your bag, to hang these in the mixture so they're not just sunk on the bottom. That's really all the equipment that you need. Now, as we start to talk about ingredients, there's a lot of variation as far as philosophies and ideas about what ingredients are needed, but I'm just going to start with a basic aerated compost tea recipe, and then I'll show you a couple of amendments that I'm going to add today. There's innumerable variations on this theme, so you can do your own research on that. But the basic things you'll need are some type of water treatment. So this is a dechlorinator. Most people will need this unless you're using rainwater or well water or something that hasn't been treated with chloramine. A lot of tap water nowadays is treated with chloramine rather than just chlorine gas. So remember that the wisdom of old was leave your water out for 24 hours and the chlorine will be gone. But with chloramine, that's not true. Next thing you'll need is some molasses for this recipe, blackstrap molasses. Now, blackstrap molasses has less sugar than other types of molasses, so you might want to make adjustments if you're using a different type of molasses. In general, I would say just run out and grab some blackstrap molasses. It has a little bit better nutrient profile. 40% sugar roughly with blackstrap molasses, 70% sugar roughly with the other types of molasses. So you might need to adjust your amounts based on that sugar because the carbon content of the blackstrap molasses is really what we're after here. But the nutrients are also obviously beneficial for the brewing process. Next thing that you need is some water. Obviously, I've got a little cup of water here, but if we're doing 32-gallon container like we have here, I'll probably need about 30 gallons of water. I'm basically just going to fill it up. The next thing that you'll need is some type of compost. I'm using worm castings today. So when you use worm castings, they call it worm tea. When you use regular finished compost, they call it compost tea. And that's basically it as far as the basic ingredients. Now, if we go a little bit farther and start adding some amendments, and I'll kind of show you the two that I'll be adding today. This is based on some experiments that I've been running. One is some fish fertilizer or fish emulsion. This provides a little bit of nitrogen to the mixture. So I'll be adding a small amount of fish emulsion to encourage that growth. And then a little bit of oats. This is cracked oats. Or split oats or whatever. You can use oatmeal or whatever you've got. Now, oats are used to increase the fungal profile because fungus in general really benefits from oats or grains. That's a lot of times what they grow on. Now, if we move on to the recipes, the recipe I'm going to be using today, and again, you can find all kinds of variations on these recipes online, but the one I'm going to be using today, I've broken down to a per gallon unit. So every gallon of water that I'm using, this is how much of each of the ingredients I'm using. Obviously, if you want, this could be ratio based or whatever, but to make it simple, here is my per gallon recipe. So per gallon of water, I will be adding 1 cup of compost. Some recipes or some people We'll get by with quite a bit less compost than that per gallon, but in my opinion, you can always add more because that will increase the probability of your beneficial bacteria kind of taking hold and outcompeting, anything else. Half a tablespoon of molasses, so that's half a tablespoon of blackstrap molasses per gallon, half a teaspoon of the fish emulsion, and half a tablespoon of the oats per gallon. That'll be mixed into the compost, as you'll see here in a minute. Okay, I think that's everything for the equipment, the recipe, and the ingredients. So let's move on to the process. All right, now that we've gotten the theory out of the way, let's get to work. I'm going to start by dealing with the solids, which is the worm castings or the compost, and the oat amendment that I'd mentioned earlier. So I'll start by just measuring out the 30 or so cups of worm castings compost, and then I'll mix in the oats, and then we'll start dealing with the liquids and mixing it all together. Why don't you follow me, and we'll start dishing them out. That's 30 cups of fresh smelling compost transferred into our measuring bucket. Now that that's complete, I'm going to start mixing in the oats. Okay, next we're going to measure out 1 cup of oats. That's our 16 tablespoons. Here's our handy dandy measuring cup, and let's get it going. Should work. Okay, so here is 1 cup of oats, measured and ready to go. We're going to mix it in, that's all we're doing. So this is pretty straightforward. Just kind of mix it in a bit. This sometimes is called charging the compost. Now we're going to take our prepared and measured compost and pile it into some containers so that it's ready to go into the liquid. Well, let's get started. As I mentioned earlier, this is a minnow bucket, which we're going to use. I've never used it before, but any bucket anything that's porous basically should work fine as long as the water can permeate it and come into contact with your compost. That's what you need. Now the second part is we're actually going to create a bag now using this kind of cheesecloth. I don't know, we might need to make a little bit more of this, but we're going to make a little bag here. We'll probably have to find another one here in a minute. Basically, to make a bag for your worm castings, you just pile your worm castings in the middle of a flat sheet like this one. That's probably about as much as I would use for this size. And then simply some live worms in there, but they'll have a nice bath. Then you simply sort of roll it up like that, twist it. And here's where your string comes in handy. You take the string and just tie it around. There we go, that'll do the trick. In this case, I'll leave myself about 3 feet of string, and I'm going to cut it right there, and this bag is ready. I'll get a couple more containers ready to go, and then we'll go over to the container area. Okay, now that we've finished working with the solids, we're going to start with the liquids. The main liquid is water. So what I'm going to do is, this is the empty 32-gallon garbage can. And what I'm going to do is just start filling with water. After I get maybe a quarter full of water, I will add the stress coat to start treating the water. This helps kind of mix it in a little bit better. Let's get it going. Okay, now I'm going to add the stress coat. The reason I say this is very economical is because actually I'm going to put a whole tablespoon in, but even for this 32-gallon tank, half a tablespoon is enough. But if you wanted to be conservative and use it, this would probably last most people a lifetime. Okay, well, with that having been filled, let's turn on the water and get it going. All right, with the water being full, what I'm doing now is attaching the air stones to the pump ends. And I'm doing this second because when I turn the pump on, that will automatically begin mixing things with the air bubbles. So as I add the liquid ingredients into the tank, they'll be mixing automatically. So I'll get this wrapped up and we'll move on to the liquid ingredients. I'm about to plug this in, but I want to mention one thing. The intake here for this particular pump can be attached to a filter. So in a future video, I'm planning to run a couple of experiments where I make a kind of filter to reduce the bacteria, because as you can imagine, the main source of bacteria in a system like this, if you close the lid, is going to be the intake. So any natural bacteria are going to come in through the intake and straight into the tank and just become part of the aerated mixture. Now you can see a pretty consistent pattern of bubbles in the tank. So Got a little vermiculite in there. We're ready to start adding the liquid ingredients. I have the molasses ready to go here. And this is in no particular order, but I'll just start adding this. The bubbles will make sure this is mixed properly. There's no need to really stir it too much. Now we're going to add these 16 teaspoons of fish emulsion. All right, there's our 1/3 of a cup. And again, this is the nitrogen source for this mixture or this recipe. 30-to-1 carbon to nitrogen is always the goal, generally speaking, with compost, and we try to keep that with the compost tea as well. So that 30-to-1 ratio is approximated with this mixture. Okay, so that's everything as far as the liquid ingredients are concerned. So the very last step is to just take our compost that's been prepared already in these bags, and we will start placing it into the tank. First with our fancy dancy minnow bucket. And just so you know what I'm doing here, I'm just tying it so it'll sink about, I don't know, halfway or so. It could go to the bottom even, but you'll get a little bit better aeration if it's not all the way at the bottom. Here's our little bag that we made. I'm gonna throw that one right in the middle. Now that our work in preparing the tea is done, we'll just let the microbes do their work for a few days. Typically we'll go 2 to 4 days on this brew. I'm gonna leave it for 3, and we'll see what happens. Now, just to review, what we've talked about is the equipment, the recipes, as well as the process, as you see here, for making compost tea. In future videos, I will be applying teas like this to some different plants and see if it has any effect on the plants and potential for diseases. So we'll see what happens. If you have any questions or suggestions, leave them in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video.